Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, Ancestors at the Crossroads of Sex, Magic, and Science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Pavini Moray, and today it's a pleasure and a joy to welcome and introduce you to Sha'can Saifa Wall.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Sha'can Saifa Wall. So happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Yeah, you are an intersex activist, a visual artist, a rabble rouser, and you grew up in Brooklyn. No, you grew up in the Bronx. So sorry. You grew up in the Bronx. You're like, what?
I was like, oh no, let's get the boroughs correct, baby.
You grew up in the Bronx. I did not mean to hipsterify you in any way.
Appreciate it.
Rewinding. Yeah. He grew up in the Bronx, and now has lived in Massachusetts, California, and now in Atlanta with your dog Justice. Mm-hmm. And through art and storytelling, Saifa wants to tell you about his love of Black people, queerness, and intersex justice. And so you can check out more about Sha'can Saifa Wall and his work through his website, which is sha'cansaifa.com. I'm going to spell it for you. SEANSAIFA.com. So welcome, Saifa.
Hey.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, tell me, let's just start a little bit by talking about your own personal relationship with your ancestors. How is that, and how do you know them? How do they come to you, and how do they engage with you in your life?
I feel like my ancestors are all around me, just because, so many people have passed on, like my mom, my dad, my oldest sister, my nana, aunts, uncles, so many people are on the other side. And I've also had dreams about the other side, like in those dreams, they say that when you die, the first person who comes to see you is a loved one, right? And I feel like I've had dreams with my father, and my father bringing me over to the other side. Because I feel like there's such a veil between life and death, I think some people think that our ancestors are in some far distant place, but I think our ancestors are living and walking among us. And I know that they live and walk with me.
How do you relate with them on the daily?
I think my dreamscapes, I think through dreams is how, ever since I was younger, people on their way to the other side would kind of visit me. As when my dad died, he came to me. When my nana died, she came to me. When my mom died in 2017, she came to me a lot, actually. And I remember, right after she died, I was very stressed out because me and my siblings were fighting, and yeah, I was so exhausted. And I was the administrator of her estate, a very small estate at that, And I remember I literally heard my mom's voice so clear in my head, literally, she was there in the room. She was like, I'm going to make this right. And, my mom had her issues, but I think me and my mom, I had a real love and devotion to my mom up until the day that she literally died. So I know that with my mom passing, I know that I'm experiencing a divine mothering that I didn't experience while she was living because of her own shortcomings, her own trauma, that didn't really allow her to be as present as I would have needed her to be at certain points in my life. So I can really see sort of like her moving, and I really feel her moving for sure. Like I felt like my dad being there, but it's something about my mom being on the other side, that her and my dad, like I'm just like, oh, y'all are really throwing down for me. Like I can
Mhm.
see it, and I can really feel it, as I'm connecting and thinking about my own legacy.
It's interesting because what I'm hearing is something that I deeply believe, which is that the dead can change, right? And that like letting go of form, like embodied form, enables us to be some kind of different, some other kind of way. And I hear that you're talking about that with your mom, but I'm also curious of like you had to shift, right? You had to shift to receive her differently, to receive that divine mothering differently. I wonder if you'd be willing to, like, what did you have to let go of?
I mean, I think it's letting go of her physical body, letting go of her physical presence. But I think I've always sort of been attuned to death, you know? Like one of my favorite artists, Flying Lotus. I really love his work because his fascination with death, right? And like I feel like we shy away from death because I don't know why. I mean, I feel like we celebrate life, and I think in some cultures, definitely some cultures for sure, celebrate, many cultures actually. Like death is a celebration, when thinking about Dia de los Muertos, like a celebration of the dead. But I think as a young person, I think I've always been attuned to death. So I think for me, in order for me to receive like my mom, I mean, my dad died when I was 14. And I think I've always been receptive to the shadow. Like I haven't been, I think I've been more fearful of the shadow when I was younger, my own shadow self. But I think as I've gotten older, I've learned to really embrace the shadow and to work in the shadow and to not be afraid. So, yeah.
Like letting go of your own fear, it sounds like.
Yeah. Like I feel like if I die tomorrow, I won't be afraid to die. I sometimes think about like how I would die. I think there's certain types of death that I wouldn't want, but I think as far as pulling back the veil, like I'm not afraid to do that.
What do you think happens when we die?
Um, I don't know. Like, I feel like we go somewhere else. I think we stay here. We may go to a different part of the world. We may go to a different part of the universe. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. But I know that there has to be something beyond this for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you're talking about the dreamscapes is the primary way that you've been able to connect with your dead, which I think is true for lots of folks. And I just wonder about, because I don't know, I've had dreams where it's so clearly a different kind of dream, that it
Uh-huh.
has an ancestral quality, or there's something that's, I can't really put words around it, maybe you can help, but that they just feel like, oh yeah, that wasn't an ordinary dream.
Mm.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's your experience and how you talk about it.
Mm. I feel like for me, like I take all of my dreams, the dreams that I have with my ancestors, the regular dreams, it's all part of this world that I access when I'm sleeping.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I think when asked the question and as you were talking, like I was just thinking there's this like element of magic that happens. Like, for example, I have in my office, I have the bed that my mom died on. It was a bed that I had bought her probably a year before she passed. And after she passed, when I had brought the bed from New York back down to Georgia, the dreams that I would have were so vivid. Like, it was really, I think I never really have vivid dreams like that, but these dreams were so vivid. And I was just like, wow, wherever she is, like, must be some place so magical. Because I just feel like for a brief window, like, I feel like the bed felt like a portal to the other side.
I'm curious what conversation you wish you had had with your mom before she died.
You know, it was funny. The night before she died, it was weird. It was so weird because, you know, just to back up, like, I had gotten a text from her, like a text. I think it was a text or an email, right? And this was like November 30th, 2016. And she was like, I'm so hungry. I can't move. And I was calling her. I couldn't reach her. And, you know, my sister went over to the apartment and my mom was screaming from the inside. You know, she was like, help, Lisa, help, you know, send help. And unbeknownst to me or my sister or any of us, was that, you know, my mom had hyperthyroidism that went into remission years ago, but then it came back and it basically weakened her heart. And she also had cancer, so she thought that the cancer had spread. So she was concerned about the cancer, but what was really killing her was a hyperthyroidism. So she had called to my sister. My sister got called 911. They came, they broke down the door. They found my mom, just like literally, she couldn't move. She had been in her bed for 4 days, and the whole apartment smelled like urine. And essentially, she didn't let them take her out. You know, she was able to tell them what year it was, the president, and she didn't consent to be moved. And she was like, my daughter, take care of me. And so they left. And when I came up to New York eventually, I came up December 9th and I saw my mom and she was so sick. And I was just like, I don't want you to die here. This is no way to die, you know, because literally there was like dirty clothes everywhere. Like, it was all this waste because she couldn't move. And so she was literally, you know, kind of cleaning herself. And it was a bad situation. And I was just like, we have to get you to a hospital. And we fought back and forth. And I eventually got her to a hospital, and they were just like, you know, she has breast cancer. It didn't spread too far. It's only in her lymph nodes. But we asked now we can save her, you know, because she had stage 4 breast cancer. But I think eventually, you know, they stabilized her. She was able to be moved to a nursing home. And she didn't consent to a flu vaccine because the flu was spreading around the nursing home. And she ended up getting the flu and she got pneumonia. And, you know, it was like the day before she was supposed to be released. I went to the nursing home and, you know, she couldn't breathe. And I was just like, Mom, why don't you go to a hospital? And she was just like, they want to put me back in the hospital, but I don't want to go. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. So, you know, I brought her home and it was a weird night the night before she passed. It was real weird. You know, she stayed in her room the whole night. I gave her medicine and I had a dream. And in the dream, my bedroom where I slept, the bedroom that I grew up in was right across from hers. And I had a dream I was looking at her, like she was standing at the entrance to her bedroom, but it was almost like she was a shadow. And there was like the snake wrapping around me, and I couldn't breathe. You know, I was fighting to get away from the snake. So I get up from that dream, and it was weird because I never slept on the couch. I always slept in the bedroom. And I go in, and she's sitting straight up. And I was just like, Mom, you know, what are you doing up? And she's like, you know, that breast cancer, I can't stop thinking about it. And, I told her, I was like, everything's going to be fine. I gave her a kiss on the forehead. And we had an appointment with the oncology department the next day. And she died that morning, And I wish, like, there have been so many people in my life who have passed away and I never got the chance to say goodbye, And I just wish that I had the chance to say goodbye. Just to say, like, I love you and thank you for what you could do. And I know you tried your best. And just to really thank her for, what she gave to me. And I know, like, in her own way, she came to me after she passed, but it wasn't the same as, like, really closing that chapter while we both were physically on this plane. So I think that's something that I really, I wish that, we could have talked, that we could have really just had a moment together.
I'm just remembering that when I was in my early 20s when my grandmother passed, and I had this dream a few months after she passed where she came to me and she put her hand on top of mine. She had a wooden banister in her home, and my hand was on the banister and her hand was on top of mine, and she called me the name that she always called me, and she said, the love doesn't go anywhere. And it was so comforting to think about it, that it doesn't, right? It's like that love is the thing that transcends the veil. And yeah, I wonder just what you would say about love and what it means to you and how you know it and how you live it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild because, I have a friend a homie, a dear friend, who passed away recently. Like, I literally found out on Facebook this morning. And I loved her, like, I loved her. She was like my first love. She was like my first girlfriend. And the way I think about it, right, just to define it is, which I believe, and I think many people have defined it this way, but, love is energy that can neither be created nor destroyed, it just is, right? And I think the love that we have for people, it grows, sometimes it shifts, but, I think this is always there. The longing is there. Sometimes our love is tied with longing. And I feel like they're just people, we hold them in different places in our bodies, not just in our hearts, like in our bodies. It's just like when we talk about, because I'm also a somatic practitioner, it's just like, where do you feel those people that you love, that you long for? Where do you feel them? And yeah, that's why for me, like, the practice of loving someone it's a practice, because I think sometimes people say I love you and their actions are so contradictory, like it just sounds good.
Yeah.
And I really believe that love is a practice. As some would say a praxis, right? But I think for me, like, love is a practice. It's an everyday practice. And I feel like for me, love is doing, love is showing. And I mean, I think, people have different ways that they prefer to receive love, for sure. But for me, I like to be in the practice of love.
For me, and I don't know if this is true for others, but I'm guessing it is, one of the impacts of trauma has been not always being able to feel my love in real time. And like when my kids were little, I remember that, like, when they would be asleep at night in their beds, and I would go and look at them and listen to them breathe, that was when I could actually feel the love. Right? Like there was this cognitive knowing of like, okay, I love these people, but in the moment I couldn't feel it. And I've worked really hard on that, on okay, like not just knowing it, but being able in the moment to feel it. And sometimes it works. And sometimes I need more space and time to be able to feel it. But I wonder, from that somatic perspective of if you'd be willing to just talk a little bit about that of like how does love get blocked? I'm not so much interested in how it does get blocked. I'm more interested in how it gets unblocked. Like how do we start to feel it again?
I mean, I think it's a letting go of the ego. I think love is so tied up, when we talk about trauma, I think love is so tied up with the ways in which we've been hurt, and what gets in the way of love, right? So, I mean, I know you wanted to do the opposite, but I think for me, it's like in my own life, I think what has gotten in the way of loving has been just my fear, my fear of loss. Because I think for me, love has been always equated with losing someone. It's just like, oh, I love you, you're gonna die. That was the the refrain in my head. It's just like, oh, I love you. If I allow myself to say out loud that I love you, like I'm gonna lose you. So I think it's, in order to love and to love deeply and expansively, I think there's something about letting go of fear, which is way easier said than done, but really allowing myself to see that when I let go to love, that people don't die, and that people will all die eventually. That's the truth. That's the absolute truth.
I mean, we're doing it right now.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Like we are dying. But I do feel like I always say, and I think that's part of my practice, is that, my mom always used to tell me when I was younger, is that you give people their flowers while they're alive. And I'm really committed to giving people their flowers while they're living. I don't want for people to die, and I'm just like, oh, wow, I wish we could have did this, that, and the third, because I have had those moments and I have had relationships like that. But I really strive in my everyday to make sure that like I give people their flowers while they're living, to let people know how much I love them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said just totally wraps around our fears of intimacy. I interviewed a woman named Colleen Cook about a year and a half ago, and she died 8 days later, and she knew she was dying. And one of the things that she said in that interview was, "My biggest fear is not about dying; it's about dying without having lived." And by lived, what she meant was allowing herself to be truly intimate with others. And I think what you're saying about giving people their flowers while they're alive, like what that, yeah, just how it translates to me is being willing to get into real intimacy with folks. And just like when you're saying drop the ego, what I'm thinking of is like, how do I bear that fear, right? It's not the fear of the dying and the end of the relationship, like you said, right? You said that you were able to let go of that, but it's like the fear of the intimacy, of getting close.
Yeah, and being willing to look at the terror and the anxiety that brings. But, I think with me, it's just like, this love has been associated with loss. And I think closeness, like proximity, has always felt really uncomfortable, right?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
almost like, oh, if I get too close, then it's just like, oh, I start freaking out,
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's just, whew, I mean, yeah, we're all pieces of work for sure, you know?
But yet there's longing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about longing.
Yeah, it's just like, one of the questions that I ask people in working with people as a practitioner, I ask, like, what do you long for? And through, sort of like my learning, because, I've learned through a lineage called generative somatics.
Yeah.
But in learning through that lineage, it's just like, how do you connect with your longing, like your deepest desires, your deepest longing? But I think in that place of longing is like the juicy stuff, right? The vulnerability, the fear, the shame. And I think it's okay to long, to want, to desire. Because I think what trauma often does is that it disconnects us from our longing. We are taught that we can't long for, that it's impossible to desire. It's wrong to want. And so for me, like my longing is the a really deep felt sense of connection or wanting connection, longing, in these COVID times, longing for physical intimacy, longing for touch, longing to be seen and felt at a deep level, I think sometimes our longing can harm us, right? Like sometimes we long for people who hurt us or who have hurt us. And so, I think longing is something that's just so, you can't put words to it. It just is what it is.
I think most of us spend a lot of time not trying to be in that wordless space of our longing because it's vast, right? If we tap into that, then we're going to have to feel the grief of sometimes our longing is met and sometimes it's not, right? But I'm just thinking of
Facts.
personally how I have filled that longing with kind of false longing
Mm,
for things or for situations or for letters after my name or money,
mm,
stuff like that. That's like because I can't even bear the real longing like you're talking about, right? Like
mm,
the real longing of belonging and closeness and like
mhm.
being known as a messy, fucked up. What did you call us? Piece of work.
Yeah, we all a piece of work in some way. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. Yeah. But like to be known in that, right? If like not,
Mm,
it's just unbearable. So, and
mhm,
we long for it at the same time. Yeah. I'm curious what you would, like how you would, like even though words aren't maybe the best way to convey it, maybe it's sound or movement or art or like how does that longing shape in you?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think like for me, my I don't know. I don't know how my longing looks right now, to be honest. I mean, I do have a longing for community. Like I have a longing, and I think that's what I was talking about earlier, like this desire to really be seen and felt at a deep level. Because I've lived in Atlanta for almost 8 years, and I'm gonna be moving soon, so that kicks up all the other shit. But I think part of the reason why I'm moving is because I had this longing for a community, like this longing to know. And it's not that I don't know people, it's not that I don't have really good friendships here, but I don't have this wider sense of being held by this extended presence of human beings that's bigger than myself, you know? And I want that because I think for me, when I am in community, like I'm motivated and I'm really just on fire, because I love being involved. I love being engaged, and when I don't have that sense of community, I think it's really hard for me to connect to a place.
100%. Yeah. And it's funny how you can live in a place and even have a lot of friends and connections, and still it doesn't feel like, yeah, I mean, my take on it is that the community is more than just the humans, that it's like the microbes, it's like the plants and the animals, everything,
Yo,
right? And so like if it's not
yeah,
the entire right community, like the human element.
yeah.
Yeah, I left the Bay after being there for 15 years just because I couldn't ever get
Mm.
it to feel like home, you know?
Same, same. Where's home at for you now?
Yeah, I moved back to a place that I had lived many years before. Like when I left here, which is Asheville, North Carolina, to go to the Bay, and then 15 years later came back, and it was just like, oh, I'm fucking home. You know, this one was
Mm.
home, and yeah, I'm curious about it for you. I'm guessing that that's part of the longing, is that sense of home. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you'd say about home.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, home is such a complex
Totally.
thing,
Yeah.
right? Because I think it's like the literal home in my body. And I think it's the kind of externalizing of this felt sense of home that exists in my body. And so I feel like this idea of home, right? Like this idea of like what feels like home. And it's just like home, you know it, right? It's just like when you meet someone and you know that the chemistry is there, you're like, oh, this is my person, whether it be romantic or platonic, right? Like, you know, your folks, you know, when it's home, you know, when it feels right, and I feel like when I know it's home, it'll feel right. Like for a long time, because I was born in New York City and I moved out to the Bay and I lived there for 9 years. And whenever I would visit New York, I was like, oh, I'm home. It's not only the city where I was born, but I was like, oh, this is home. And I went back last year for Pride because I marched in the Queer Pride March, and I was like, New York doesn't feel like home. It's a place that I know. It's a place that I'm familiar with. My parents are buried there, so I think there's a part of New York that will always feel like home, but it isn't home. And so, I have a really deep longing for home, because I have a home in Atlanta that I love very much. Like, I look around and I put so much sweat and labor and tears into and joy and laughter and into this place that is home, my physical home. But the city outside of these walls don't feel like home. You know, it's just like I don't know where that place is, but I know that when I find it, it'll feel right. I'll just know.
Yeah, it's weird, right? That it's like a home is a body thing. It's
Mhm.
not, right. I mean, it makes sense, but it's also kind of weird to be like, all right, I can't override the
Mm.
knowing in my body on this one, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. I know you are a somatics practitioner and an intersex activist, and just I'd love to hear, how do those things intersect for you, and just a little bit more about the work that you're doing in the world.
Yeah. So, I had started recovery in 2007 because I had hit a bottom around my compulsion towards sex. Like I was addicted to sex. And what was wild is that I was deathly afraid of commitment and emotional intimacy, but I was addicted to sex, you know? And it was to the point, because I remember, so sex positive or, some people who are sex educators or people who are sex positive was like, what's the matter with being addicted to sex? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like it literally was killing me, was harming me. For example, like I was totally at work watching porn, like totally having an affair with my coworker. And I had this belief that if I had more sex, that eventually it would fill this hole that was inside of me. And I got scared because the hole never filled up. And so I entered recovery in 2007. And in, what was it, the spring? Either the fall or spring, 2009, I did a training with this organization. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Generation 5. And their goal was to end child sexual abuse in 5 generations. And, I was like, oh, well, I'm not a survivor of child sexual abuse. I'll be fine. And every day after the training, it was a 3-day training, my body just locked up. And my friend, who was still a somatic practitioner, she was like, oh, you're having a somatic reaction to the content. And when she said that, I was like, what? What? I was floored. I was like, what do you mean? And then that's when I got interested and I started taking courses with generative somatics, and started seeing a somatic therapist. And, I had done talk therapy for a long time because I knew I was traumatized. Like I definitely had PTSD. So I just knew. I was like, oh yeah, I know I'm traumatized. But I think my body held different stories. And, and I knew that for Black people, for intersex people, for people who experience trauma in their bodies by a state that is violent, I think it's imperative for us to heal the body as well, to heal our mind, to heal our hearts, and to heal our whole body. So I think that's when I really embarked on a path to really heal myself. And I feel like as an intersex person who is a survivor of medical violence, I also think it's very important for me to heal my body because they did this thing. I was castrated when I was 13, and it was without my thorough informed consent. Like, I think there's a consent and there's a thorough informed consent, because if the consent process would have been thorough, I would still have my balls, and I think it's because of that I am a survivor. And so with that said, I feel like for me, embarking on, healing myself and also working with others, like, I think it's a way of really kind of staying involved, because I think our process of healing is lifelong, I feel. There's never a point in time when I can be like, oh, I'm healed,
Oh, I
because,
want there to be.
whew, would love that. Would love that for me. Would love that for you. But I don't believe there's ever a place. I think there are sort of milestones. I think there are things that you can be healed from, but I think for me, this is Saifa just in my life. Like, I feel like I'm always unearthing something, I'm always healing something. For example, I did a somatic course in December, and, we were working on the pelvis area, the pelvis and the legs. And the pelvis is where I was castrated. I have castration scars. They literally, because my testes sat in the inguinal canal, that's where they removed them from. And when the practicing person, my practice partner, when she pressed there, I got so nauseous. And what's wild about that is that after I came out of surgery when I was 13 years old, I was so nauseous. And I remember my mom kept telling me, like, you have to throw up. You'll feel so much better. You have to throw up. I was so, so nauseous. And it's funny, like, day 1, she presses there, I get nauseous. Day 2, I work with a different practice partner, and I ended up throwing up on a table. And, this is like almost 30 years later. And, I could have this narrative in my mind about what that means, blah, 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 blah. Because I think for those of us who are social justice folks, academics, folks on the left, we have this wonderful way of, processing and sort of theorizing and are very eloquent and sometimes too eloquent about our own grief. But our body tells different stories. Our body tells us about our longing. Our body tells us about what we deeply desire. And yeah, 30 years later, let go of something else that was just waiting, that was hiding right at the surface,
I do, actually. Yeah, of just the way that, those things live in us until they shift, right? Until we're able to move towards a new shape that we're consciously creating, right? They're there and they're held. And I've definitely, I'm not intersex and I am trans and definitely have those imprints, in the body, on the body level of, oh yeah, here's all of this information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's all of this history that's just here and hanging out and waiting for me to open it a packet. Yeah, when I started working out and lifting heavy weight a few years ago, like I would just be in the gym and then I would just start like I'd be lifting something really heavy, right? With usually like pushing, like bench press or something, and I would just start crying. Yeah, it was so embarrassing. Because there was no story. It was just like, oh yeah, here's all this stuff that's that's held in the body, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and just the way that those oppressions get stored in the body as trauma too is I think also what you're naming, right? Of it's not just what we've lived through, it's what we live inside of, right? And how how that gets, it shapes us.
Yeah, sure does.
Saifa, I'm super excited to be in conversation with you and just really appreciate, like, at least I'll speak for myself, I need embodied examples of healing, right? Because like in those hard moments, sometimes I'm asking myself, like, is this even real? Can this even work? Can I even heal from these things, right? And I think that that's what we do for each other when we show up like this in these kinds of conversations, and we make it real and we make it about, and I just really having a lot of real time love and appreciation for you, and the way you're able to bear yourself, and be so, just so honest about it. It's really beautiful. And I want to just see if there's, I'll let that land for a sec. Okay, sorry.
No. I did that because, I feel like, especially with intersex activism, I see the ways it just takes people out, because I think the violation that we experience, especially for those of us who have had surgeries, is devastating.
Yeah.
And I feel like for people to be active, to organize in spite of that is like a miracle. And so I think for me, it's just like, as much as I'm committed to the liberation of intersex people from medical violence, I'm also committed to protecting, caring for, loving, and healing my Black body, because there are multiple assaults on psychic, multiple assaults on my Black intersex body. And I think as much as I want to be political, I think it's also incumbent upon me to be soft, to be vulnerable, to not be rigid, but to really, be permeable, and to let, just really keep in the practice or be in the practice of really allowing my heart to be soft in a world that tells you to close down, shut up, so much devastation that would actually harden us. But I think these are the times that require us to be the most soft. with boundaries, of course, But I think even having boundaries is a form of love, for yourself and for others.
Sha'can, Saifa, well, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation with you. So, and actually, I would love to have you come back on the show because we didn't even touch into kind of the spiritual components of intersex and what that is and the special magics there. And if you want, I'd love to have you come back and talk more about that.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So, folks who are listening, you can find out more about Saifa on the website ShaanSaifa.com, SeanSaifa.com. It will be in the show notes so that you can reach out and really just wanting to say thank you to you, Saifa. Yeah,
thank you for this.
So, and if this podcast was helpful, I want to hear from you. So write to me at bespokenbones.com. And I'm Pavini Moray. This is Bespoken Bones. And we'll be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.